So hello and welcome to our webinar, How Creative Research Methods Challenge Power Dynamics in Knowledge Production. I thought it was an interesting topic. Clearly, a lot of people agree with me. My name's Helen Kara. I'm an independent researcher. I've been one for 26 years and an independent scholar. And I'm delighted to introduce our excellent speakers. We've got Ella Harris is up first.
Hello.
Heidi van Rooyen is second, and then Su-ming Khoo, who is last but most definitely not least. Well, there isn't a least. There isn't a least option. And this event is being hosted by Bristol University Press. And there will be information coming into the chat soon about interesting things like discounts on books for people attending this webinar. So if you've got questions, a couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions for the panelists, and I hope you do, please put them in the Q&A function. There are closed captions enabled on the webinar. So still sorry, I've just seen something in the chat about closed captions. Closed captions are enabled. There's a button at the bottom of your screen which says CC, show captions. You can activate the caption settings from there. So you should be able to sort that out for yourselves. And yes, the recordings will be shared. So questions for panelists, please use the Q&A. You'll see again, it's a button at the bottom of your screen. On my screen, it's next to the closed captions button. And put your questions in there rather than in the chat, because the chat's so busy, we might miss them. And also, when questions go into the Q&A, you can upvote the questions. If you don't want to put your own questions, or whether even if you do, you can upvote any questions that you may particularly want to have answered. If you've got any technical issues, please use the chat. Abby from Bristol University Press is with us, Abby Tozer, and we'll be able to help if you've got any, or we'll do her best to help if you've got any technical problems. There are codes in the chat for discounts. You can order any Bristol University Press book at 50% discount. The code is BUP24. That seems like last year's code, but I'm assured that is the code. Use that at checkout. There'll be links in the chat to help with that. And Bristol University Press are also offering a free ebook. You simply need to add your name and email address to their newsletter list via the form shared in the chat, and a copy will be sent to you. There's a question about, are we muted automatically, please? That's one for you, Abby, I think. We will have a recording of the webinar that will be available afterwards. It might take a little time just to get it sorted, but it will be made available, and I think you'll all get an email to let you know. So that's all the housekeeping stuff. So our first panelist is Dr. Ella Harris, who's another independent researcher, whoop, whoop, and an academic researcher. That's okay, you can be both, with expertise in creative methods and crisis cultures. Her work explores how inventive approaches to methodology can help us to understand and intervene in intersecting crises. She's the author of Encountering the World with iDocs for Bristol University Press, Rebranding Precarity for Zed Books, co-author of Reconstructing the American Dream for Intellect Press, and co-editor of The Growing Trend of Living Small for Routledge. Ella provides research delivery and training under the banner of Progress Today, and she's going to pop a link to that in the chat for you. And she is going to discuss how interactive documentaries, also known as iDocs, create non-linear storytelling pathways that challenge dominant narratives and amplify diverse voices. Ella, off you go.
Thank you very much. So hi everyone, it's great to be here today and amazing to see 408 people and counting coming. So I think Helen's right, it's a really pertinent topic and I'm really excited to talk to everybody about it today. I'm going to just share my screen, if you give me a second. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Helen, for the invitation to be on this panel. I'm going to talk today about interactive documentary, which is a research method I've been working with for about 10 years now. And I'm going to think a bit about how iDocs, which they're also called, can help to kind of challenge power dynamics in knowledge production. So firstly, a little bit about me. Helen introduced me already. I'm a creative researcher. I specialize in creative methods and crisis cultures. So I'm really interested in how creativity in research can help us to kind of problematize and untangle the kind of complexities of intersecting crises in a contemporary world that's defined by a sort of polycrisis. So these are some books I've written, which Helen mentioned previously. I'm also a former athlete. I used to be a boxer and national champion of England. I say that because I think it's always nice to kind of know someone's full self. And I think this does impact how I do my research. I think after I retired from boxing, I needed a kind of equivalently exciting way of doing research. So that kind of drew me into creative methods as an approach to kind of get a bit of adrenaline up by doing something a little bit inventive and exciting. So I'm going to talk, as I said, about iDocs, but I'm not sure everybody will know what iDocs are. Could everyone just kind of put in the chat a sort of yes, no on, do you know what iDocs are? I can get a kind of vague sense, okay, getting a lot of no's. Good, fantastic. It's great to introduce people to something new. So interactive documentary, or iDocs, are web-based ways of kind of producing multimedia documentaries. They started as a kind of offshoot documentary filmmaking, but didn't really take off, actually. Documentary filmmakers didn't really find that audiences... Oh, yes.
Can I just interrupt for a second? There's been a request in the chat. Can you speak a little slower?
Oh,
Not everyone
sorry,
here
yeah,
is
doing my
native
double
English
speed.
speaker. Can you slow
Okay,
down?
yeah, of course I can. Yes, sorry about that. Okay, do call me out again if let's back into double speed. I have a tendency to do that. Okay, yeah. So iDocs, as I was saying, are web-based multimedia documentaries that started in documentary filmmaking, but didn't really take off in that arena. But in the past sort of 10 years or so, researchers, including myself, have become particularly interested in what iDocs can add to research processes. So on the screen here, you have a kind of few examples of what iDocs can look like. So they're all hosted online, and they take a range of different forms that kind of range from quite sort of high-end, big budget productions through to kind of quite kind of bottom-up grassroots creations. So for example, The Universe Within is a really high budget project where you pick one of these 3 avatars that you can see here, and they take you to different film clips where you can watch little films about people living in high rises around the world. Then in the bottom right corner, we have something a little bit more kind of cartoon based, Welcome to Pine Point, where you scroll through different kind of cartoons slides that tell you the story of a declining town in America. Or in the bottom left, we have Refugee Republic, which is a map-based iDoc where you follow different pathways and watch different film clips, see different kind of little visuals and graphics about life in a refugee camp. Then the top right corner, 18 Days in Egypt, I'll talk about a little bit later, but that's a crowdsourced iDoc where people upload their own content, tell their own stories of the Arab Spring. So just to point out the links, the titles here are underlined, they're actually links. So when you get the slides, you'll be able to follow the links and find out about these iDoc projects. So just a couple more on the screen here that I'll let you explore when you get the slides yourself. But just to kind of summarize, iDocs are defined by being nonlinear, interactive, and multi-perspectival. So what I mean by that is they tell multiple stories in one interface. So what you can see in all the different examples on the screen here is that there are kind of way of telling stories where you collate lots of kind of discrete pieces of media, lots of different kind of film clips or visuals or bits of audio or text into one interface. And this is what I think makes them really interesting for thinking about how to challenge power dynamics in knowledge production. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but first of all, I kind of just frame the problem. So one issue among many in knowledge production is that it's generally dominated by elites. And this is something that Miranda Fricker, the philosopher, has defined as epistemic injustice. I think this is a really interesting and useful concept. There's 2 parts to it. So the first is testimonial injustice. And this relates to the idea that not everyone is treated equally as a knower. So because of prejudice or stigma, some people's knowledge is not taken as seriously or kind of discounted. The second part is a little bit more complicated, and that's about hermeneutical injustice. So that's the idea that because knowledge production is dominated by an elite group, not everybody gets the concepts that they need to navigate their life world. So if like one particular group dominate knowledge production, the concepts tend to serve that group. So other people kind of don't have the information or the concepts or the ideas that help them to kind of understand and unpick their own experiences. So the kind of summary point there is that dominant narratives and discourses are set by those with power, and this is a big problem in knowledge production. So I want to think a little bit with you guys today about how iDocs could help with that. So in the new book I've written for Helen's series, I talk about how designing an iDoc can help us to interrogate power dynamics. There's lots of different areas within that I go into in the book that I haven't got time for today. But what I want to focus on today is 2 dimensions of what iDocs are that can kind of help to untangle this question. The first is kind of the fact that they're multi-perspectival, I can never say. The second is that they're interactive. So they invite users to interact, to kind of click through, to decide what they want to see in what order, sometimes to upload their own content, sometimes to ask questions. And I think that these 2 elements of iDocs are kind of really crucial in how, as a research tool, they can help us to kind of think about power dynamics and critique power structures in knowledge production. So I want to give a couple of examples of how that can work in different iDocs. So these 2 iDocs here are really interesting because they're both crowdsourced iDocs. So 18 Days in Egypt I mentioned previously, and on the left here we have Athens Report. So these are both iDocs where the producers, rather than kind of make their own content or their own material for the iDoc, just made a platform and they invited people to upload their own content to it. So Athens Report is about the Greek debt crisis, and 80 Days in Egypt is about the Arab Spring in Egypt. And in both instances, they invite people to tell their own stories of those major political and economic events in order to kind of document it from their own point of view. There's quite a kind of clear way here in which the kind of dominant narratives around these political issues that might be kind of prevalent in the media are being contested by instead inviting multiple people to tell their own stories and not kind of trying to conflate those stories into one narrative, but sort of letting these multiple different stories sit alongside each other and kind of play out in whatever way they do, whether they kind of concur or whether they diverge. Doesn't really matter. It's all about telling multiple stories to kind of show the different perspectives on a topic. So this is the way in which I think that multiple activity in iDocs can help to kind of contest that idea of kind of one dominant narrative driven by an elite group. And then thinking about interactivity, this is an iDoc that I created with a group of Londoners during lockdown. It's called the Lockdown Game. So in this project, I worked with 15 Londoners who made their own content for an iDoc, so little film clips, images, bits of text, bits of audio, and then they worked as a group to kind of co-design this interface that's on the screen now. And this was a really interesting process. And I think you can see here how the group used interactivity to help kind of audiences engaging with the iDoc to think about their own relationship to power structures during lockdown. So they designed these kind of funny little pop-up windows, reminiscent of the sort of 90s windows you used to get on computers that were really irritating, where you get asked these questions like, sorry, this journey is legal unless you're Dominic Cummings, and you get to answer if you are or you're not. So in this kind of interactivity, the group sort of tried to ask audiences to think about their own agency, kind of freedom, constraint, compliance in relation to lockdown rules. But they also designed another feature, which was these link areas in the iDoc, where you can sort of link out to different activities happening locally. Might be protest groups, might be activist groups, might be kind of charities or different resources, so that users can also kind of move out into the real world space and kind of do something about it. So what the group were worried about designing the iDoc was that they were kind of pointing out your constraints, that you're kind of like stuck within this lockdown governance, but not giving people a way to feel hopeful or feel it had any agency. So these links were meant to encourage people to think about what can they do in the local area, how can they sort of help those around them. So again, in this way, the group used interactivity in iDoc design to help audiences to kind of think about their own agency and think about how they can contest power structures. There's also a sort of third way in which this process, I think, helps to think about how iDocs can challenge knowledge production power dynamics, which is that in this process, the group sort of co-created the iDoc themselves. They designed their own content, they made their own content, they designed the interface as a group with my oversight, but not with my direction. And this kind of means that the stories told through the iDoc are their stories in a kind of way which is less mediated than they would be if I'd written a journal article about the topic, for example. So in that way as well, I think iDoc making as a co-creative process can help people to sort of voice their own experiences in a way which is a little bit less mediated and might therefore kind of get their knowledge more into kind of public consciousness. So to kind of summarize what I've been saying, this is how I think iDocs can challenge power dynamics in knowledge production. I think firstly, by gathering multiple, perhaps divergent stories into a shared world in a way that might contest dominant or meta-narratives. Secondly, by using interactivity to help audiences critique their own agency, power, freedom, complicity, etc. And thirdly, by enabling participants to create and directly share both individual and collective stories. So this is what I think iDocs can add into the space. If you want to know more about iDocs, I'm actually hosting a free webinar coming up soon in May. So if you do want to come to that, there's a QR code here where you can sign up, and that will be more about how you can sort of make iDocs within your research. So I'll be talking a bit more there about what iDocs are, how they can enrich research, and how you can make them. But for now, I just want to leave it at that, and I'm really excited to get into discussion. Just one more thing to note is that when you get the slides, if you're interested in thinking about how iDocs can work in your research, I've added at the end of the slides a sort of thinking tool I created where you can ask yourself prompt questions to think about what what making an iDoc might require from you in your research field. So if you're making an iDoc about your own research topic, you can ask these questions of yourself and sort of think about what an iDoc might look like. And that should be a way to kind of think more deeply about particular dimensions of your research subject. So when you get the slides, please feel free to have a browse of that. Any questions, shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to help. But yeah, that's me. Thanks very much.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Ella. We've got some great questions in the Q&A, but we are going to listen to the other two speakers first and then deal with all the questions at the end. And the slides will be shared and so on, so that will all be coming your way. So I want to introduce next Heidi van Rooyen, who's very kindly joining us early in the morning in Seattle. Heidi is Professor and Chair of the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington and co-editor of Poetic Inquiry as Research. Heidi is going to introduce Poetic Inquiry, a very different method from iDocs, but I think in some ways complementary. It's a creative research approach that allows for deeper exploration and expression while centering decolonial perspectives. Heidi, over to you.
Thanks very much, Helen, and shout out to all my colleagues and friends and collaborators in this consortium for Poetic Inquiry in the Global South. It's really lovely to see all your faces and names, and of course, the other 1,000 people on the webinar too. Lovely to see you. So I'm going to kick off and talk about Poetic Inquiry as a decolonizing force. Decolonizing land, space knowledge, discipline, methodologies, minds, selves. Defensiveness, comfort, fear, excitement, impatient, anger arise. Allow for, create space to learn, grow for multiple voices to be transformed. So Western science views knowledge through a hierarchical and linear lens, continues to dominate and influence academic practices that diminish and overshadow indigenous worldviews, dismissing them as inferior. They create this kind of epistemic justice that Ella was talking about, where knowledge production privileges Euro-Western views and ways of knowing. Western methods are not the only valid forms of science. Western methods are not the only valid forms of science. Colonization infuses research with an attitude and a spirit of ownership over the world. This kind of research through imperial eyes describes an approach that assumes Western ideas about the most fundamental things are the only ideas possible to hold, the only rational ideas and the only ideas which can make sense of social life and human beings. Such research steals knowledge for the benefit of those who take it. Such research steals knowledge for the benefit of those who take it, not for those who originally held it. Decolonization critically challenges colonial frameworks and argues for new ways of research that respect and incorporate the views and knowledge of indigenous groups and others who've been marginalized. It strives to develop new, inclusive theories and methods that reflect and support the diverse ways of knowing and the perspectives of colonized peoples. Approaches like Poetic Inquiry and other arts-based approaches offer a critique of colonial methods and provide, I think, much needed, different, refreshing perspectives. Poetic Inquiry combines the art of poetry with the principles of qualitative research, combines the art of poetry with the principles of qualitative research. There is no one way to do Poetic Inquiry. The approach allows for flexible and expressive engagement with research, with various integrations of poetry and qualitative methods occurring on a spectrum from studies dominated by poetic elements to those incorporating subtle poetic touches alongside more traditional components. The approach to Poetic Inquiry in our forthcoming book, which is available at 15%. It's a little kind of sales pitch, right, Helen, we allowed. But the approach to Poetic Inquiry in our forthcoming book is deeply intertwined with these ideas of the decolonization of research. At the heart of decolonization is poetry. At the heart of decolonization for me, for us, for those who work in this space, is the idea of poetry. And this is why we think so. Poetry, with its ability to distill, to evoke, to describe, to offer lines of inquiry that allow us to see the world, that allow us to understand human experience through different lenses, allows us to confront our dated, limited ways of thinking about and knowing the other. By valuing lived experience and diverse ways of knowing, Poetic Inquiry acts as a form of resistance, helping to dismantle oppressive research paradigms, to appreciate complex identities and experiences that cannot easily be summed up with simple labels. We believe, and I think we try and demonstrate in this book, as have others who've written about poetic inquiry, by integrating poetic techniques and approaches, we enhance also the expressive power of our research, allowing it to resonate with wider, more diverse audiences, including those typically excluded from academic discourse. I want to say a few things about what this engagement with poetic inquiry in research can do, what this engagement with poetic inquiry and using it in a way to decolonize these typical ways of knowing that we've all been brought up in the academy, what it can do to you as a researcher, contemplating, thinking, wanting to engage with this methodology. So for me, the first thing is as follows. After almost 2 decades of being a social scientist and a researcher, when I came across poetic inquiry, it really felt like a full circle moment. It felt like it brought together the creative, expansive poet self with this increasingly narrowed, constrained academic self. As poet researcher, it gave me fresh language and insights and ways to speak about the social justice issues, race, gender, sexuality, class, that had framed my career. Fresh language, insights and ways to interrogate the self, to interrogate the social and the political. So in many, many ways, coming across poetic inquiry in this kind of social space research environment that I was working in, feeling increasingly constrained in the academy, in many ways, discovering the tools of poetic inquiry felt like coming home, felt like it gave me a new language, a new way to look at myself and the world and the work that I was doing. One of the important decolonizing aspects of poetic inquiry as a method, I think, is that it challenges power. It challenges power. Poetic inquiry forced me to grapple with issues of power, authority, and voice in research, to reflect and critique its omniscience, its wobbly authority, to reflect and critique its omniscience, its wobbly authority. And so in our work with trans women in Namibia and South Africa and other work that we do under the banner of poetic inquiry that is respectful, collaborative, and participatory, what it does, it decenters power. It shifts our view of research participants as subjects, as passive data sources, as other, and instead values them as active participants in shaping research that directly affects their life, honors them and values them as active participants in their lives that we as researchers are privileged to walk alongside, engage in, understand, talk about, write about. Thirdly, it awakened me. It awakened me. Over time, we all become dead to our work. We all become dead to our work. The endless paper, the endless bureaucracy, the endless corporatization of our institutions, they deaden us. They take away that vital life force that keeps us passionate and engaged in the things that we're interested in the academy. And so over time, we all become dead to our work and the very issues that we are passionate about. And I did too. And so discovering poetic inquiry about 8 or 9 years ago helped me to kind of get to feel enlivened, to rekindle that passion again. I think what happened to me probably happens to others as well. We find ways to retreat behind the comfort of our positions and our authority as knowledge producers. And so for me, through collaboration and co-construction of turning data into poems, of engaging with research data poetically, I was able to kind of see the lived realities of the various groups I worked with in different ways. Those groups and those voices and those people that are often lost in our endless interview transcripts, that are lost in chunks of text, that are lost in academic articles, never to be seen and read by anyone but ourselves. Never to be seen and read by anyone, I think, who matters, those very people we write about. And so poetic inquiry in its ways in which it allows us to both engage and to turn our research data into poetry and to distill them and to offer them to the world, allows us to foreground these lives that are not visible. It allows us to emphasize and distill in evocative and moving ways these lives that we've become a bit deadened to and that we kind of report in these really typical ways in our research. Poetic inquiry made me human again, and for that I'm eternally grateful. It allowed me to fully see how these fellow human beings, their stresses and strains, it urged me to become a better collaborator and mediator, engaging in and involving participants more fully in my research and writing. So to be human is central to the decolonization project. To be human is central to the decolonization project. As we use poetry and inquiry to capture and convey the complexities of human experience, I think a couple of things happen. It transforms our understanding, it enriches our interactions, and paves the way for meaningful changes, for new possibilities. It paves the way for new and better worlds. These gifts of poetry, of poetic inquiry, I think is what the world needs now, is what the world always needs. Art, poetry, stories, words. These tools have the critical capacity to substantively address the profound challenges we face. At a time when science is being challenged, lives are being devastated and upended, arts-based responses, poetic inquiry, poetry, art, stories, words are indispensable to a critical engagement with our world. Our daily slog needs myth-making, craft, art, poetry, to unearth the stories dead in our bones. Our day's daily slog needs myth-making, craft, art, poetry, to unearth the stories dead in our bones. We can't solve uncertainty. We can't solve uncertainty, but we can navigate mystery. We can rescue little ideas that gleam for a second in our soul, then disappear. We can coax them back. If we behold, not just see each other in the world, if we witness our stories with wonder and curiosity, we make space for the miraculous. We make space for grace. Thank you, Helen.
So lovely. Thank you, Heidi. And a really nice juxtaposition, I think, between your work and Ella's work. And although they're very different, there are echoes and parallels that I think are, yeah, just wow, brilliant. Good, thank you. So let's move on now to the last of our panelists, Su-ming Khoo, who is Associate Professor and Head of Sociology at the University of Galway in Ireland, and also Visiting Professor in Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. She researches, teaches and writes about human development, human rights, public goods, development alternatives, decoloniality, global activism and learning, higher education and transdisciplinarity, and that's not all. She's joint editor-in-chief with Sophie Woodward and Harriet Short of the new Journal of Creative Research Methods, which is its first issue should be out in 6 months' time. It's so exciting. This has taken a lot of work behind the scenes for a long time, but we're really getting there now. And she is going to explore how someone's just said in the chat that they can see the presenter view, Sue, of your presentation. I don't know if you want to change that.
I don't know how I can do that now.
Maybe stop sharing and then start again from share from beginning or something. I think that might work. And while you're doing that, I will explain. While you're doing that, I will explain that you're going to explore how creative methods intersect with decolonial, feminist, and anti-racist research, pushing the boundaries of traditional knowledge institutions. Off you go.
Okay, now hopefully you can see the right view. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks very, very much there, Helen. So a very big scope and deep scope to follow. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Ella. So what I'm going to do is just start with a very simple starting point, which was how am I going to talk about the use of creative methods in decolonial, feminist, anti-racist, and social justice research from my own starting point. I suppose I've Helen to thank or blame, I don't know, for getting involved in a kind of a journey to bring together and bundle together the ideas of creativity and ethics. So that's set me onto a kind of certain path that I'm really, really grateful to Helen for kind of pushing me along and encouraging me to explore how these ideas of creativity and ethics might go together. And so we started really way back at the beginning of the pandemic with a series of very small books ebooks, rapidly published ebooks, published by Policy Press and imprinter Bristol University Press, to respond to COVID and to help researchers deal with the fact that there were pandemic restrictions and research was not normal anymore. And it started off with the first volume, which was response and reassessment. You know, what can we do? What can't we do? Well, we have to do it by Zoom. To questions of resilience and care. And then the third volume was creativity and ethics. And I just really loved the way the themes just suggested themselves to us. And then what couldn't go into the 3 books then went into another book called Qualitative and Digital Research in Times of Crisis, Methods, Reflexivity, and Ethics. So there's this kind of journey of my own reflexivity and reflexively thinking about what creativity and ethics had to do with each other. Clearly that creativity is needed to solve problems that surface during crises, but a growing realization that not all creativity is ethical. Not all creativity is necessarily compatible with these interdisciplinary emancipatory goals of decolonial research, anti-racist research, feminist research. And recognizing that, well, creativity can give rise to unintentional as well as intentional consequences. And there are always consequences to bringing anything new into the world. And many creative innovations actually have potential to harm. They might create new problems. They might cement inaction on existing problems that really need solutions. And then we have this sense of the world like continuously accelerating. And these consequences might pile up as our busy work accelerates. And gets more and more bureaucratic, this deadening thing that Heidi mentioned in her poetic voicing, this bureaucratic juggernaut of entangled work and acceleration and uncertainty. And this sense diminishes our capacities to pause, to think about what we are doing in our research and in our lives more generally. How can we prevent ourselves from falling deeper into ethical dark spaces where ethics remain unexamined? So I also started thinking a bit about what the dark spaces are of ethics. And one of the dark spaces is the bright spaces, apparently. So I tried to come up with a slide, and immediately slide designer suggested this bossy, busy, and ugly slide. And it didn't allow me to edit it, which I thought was very apposite. Yeah, it was exactly what is wrong with this, a particular discourse, a particular story and narrative of creativity that takes creativity away from us human beings and gives it to industry. So it's all about planning, giving time, graphs of productivity, business ideas, and this kind of busy, colorful, bossy, and impossible to edit template. And I just thought it was a perfect metaphor for what I resist about industrial creativity. And I'm very determined that whatever we do in creative research methods is not this. Yeah, over-determined, pushy, defining creativity as producing ideas, outcomes that are appropriate to the goals of business. But the actual essence of creativity remaining terribly vague, while breaking up and fragmenting the processes of creativity into definite skills, which are kind of taught in a rather sort of pushy way, to yield creativity that yields profits that can be captured by a business entity. So this is creativity which is about productivity, not about collectivistic values. It's about productivity and cooperation to produce profit, not productivity and cooperation to produce some other individually, personally, or socially valued good. Yeah, but nevertheless, creativity is always open-ended. It can't be shut down. So let's just get away from this for a minute and let me think about decolonial art for a minute, because it helps us ask the question of what the creativity is for and where does it come from. And these questions have already been raised by Ella and Heidi about epistemic justice or injustice. And I love the works of this artist, Algerian-French artist, Kader Attia, who makes decolonial art for the purpose not of bringing some innovation that can be sold, but to slightly repair colonial amnesia about non-Western cultures. And here is a rather fuzzy picture of a work that he has made out of couscous called Gardaya, untitled. Yeah. It was first shown in this exhibition based on this beautiful quote from Walter Benjamin, "But a storm is blowing from paradise, the contemporary art of the Middle East and North Africa." In this work of art, he questions Le Corbusier, the famous French modernist architect's use of the ideas, the visual ideas and architectural forms that had been practiced by Algerian people for 1,000 years and were in the fabric of these buildings of this town, the city, Gardaya in Algeria. But of course, Le Corbusier, who was fated as a European architectural genius, never acknowledged, that his inspiration came from visiting this Algerian city, this beautiful Algerian city, and a lot of his aesthetic actually should have paid homage to it. So there's actually in the background then a photograph of Le Corbusier facing this couscous gardaya made out of couscous and salt. And it also connects him to the cookery of the region and the other forms of knowledge that are not brutalist modernist architecture and those elite and high prestige artistic endeavors. Now, but really, art is for artists. And most of us, I suppose, are a little bit more prosaic in thinking about where the decolonization idea come into us and why we need to deal with the problem of the coloniality of knowledge. And that's because coloniality defines a kind of limit case for thinking, theorizing, doing methods, and interpreting our research. So decolonial theory come in because they challenge Eurocentric assumptions about the system of knowledge, as we've already heard. Meanwhile, art-based methods help decolonial perspectives to develop in our research by helping us to decolonize even those forms of research that are very people-oriented, that are participatory by design. And they help us to take forward these kinds of critiques of who's allowed to know things, who is knowledgeable, who has culture, who has an understanding of problems and solutions, to take forward those critiques, to question power, the diversity of knowledge and intersectionality in a world where we are now in a post-normal scientific paradigm, where we need a broader range of peers to help us interpret the world and understand what its problems are and how we are to go about dealing with these multiple crises. So to question power in that is essential, and arts-based methods help us. I just want to gesture a little bit towards this really lovely book by good friend Tina Seppälä and her collaborators Melanie Sarantu and Satu Mittinen on using arts-based methods for decolonizing participatory research and adding value to participatory research by opening out what we mean by participation, by enabling us to have richer forms of participation and more fun and exciting and yeah, easily understood, easily practiced forms of participation. Okay, so let me just end by welcoming you to our lovely new community. We've started this journal, Helen and myself and Sophie and Harriet, with the support of Bristol University Press, who are a brilliant publisher and really, really understanding and really helpful. And they haven't been, they've been such a dream to work with, because whenever they asked us to do things and we said, no, we don't want to do them like that, we want to do them differently, they've listened to us. And they've been really, really open and are really, really helpful and kind and thoughtful and ethical. So we hope that this journal will be a new community that encourages the development of creative methods in ways that help to reduce hierarchies, that diversify and pluralize voices in our research practice, and diversify and pluralize perspectives in ways that generate and facilitate the generation of helpful and productive conversations, generative, hospitable, and convivial conversations, which lead to learning and knowing more and better and differently about the world. And in order to do that, we need to facilitate unlearning so that we can unexpect the expected and learn to learn. And we hope this will play a little part in helping to undo hierarchical structures that are rooted in coloniality and its intersections with other kinds of divisions and injustices. So please join us. Consider submitting a paper. The editorial management platform will be open very, very soon, we hope, certainly within the next month. And look out for us. Come and join us, read us, write for us, review for us, talk to us, criticize us, give us hell, and give us whatever you have to offer. And we will try and help you to get it out into the world and to amplify it. Thanks very much.
Lovely, thank you, Sue. So that's all of our panelists. So we're going to turn to questions now, and we're not going to get through them all, but we'll do as many as we can. And people have been kindly upvoting, so we'll start with the most popular. I'm actually going to answer the first one. The first one is from Andia Paz, who asks, how do we analyze data gathered creatively, such as from iDocs? Ta-da! This is what you need. The Handbook of Creative Data Analysis came out in September. And there's a story to this book. This book came out of a previous webinar that I did for Bristol University Press with a couple of colleagues about creative methods. And we got so many questions about creative data analysis that after the webinar, I said to them, how about we do a book together? And they said, yes. There are now 29 chapters in here, but you can also use conventional methods to analyze data gathered creatively. You don't have to use you don't have to use creative analytic methods with creative data necessarily. You might want to use some statistical analysis. You might want to use some thematic analysis, something quite tried and tested, narrative analysis, discourse analysis. So you devise a whole new analytic method if you wish. I'm probably talking too fast now, Ella. I think it's my turn because I'm a bit overexcited. So let's move on from that. The next most popular question is one for Ella. What software or programs have been used to create iDocs, and are they user-friendly for those of us who are IT literate to a point but don't have skills in building digital programs? Do you want to take that one, Ella?
Thank you. I feel you on that to a point. That's definitely me. Yes, so there's a kind of long and a short answer to that question. So I'll try and be quite brief because I know we haven't got that much time without talking at double speed. So there's lots of different options with iDoc making. So when I made the lockdown game, I worked with the person that coded it for me from scratch, essentially. I think he kind of pulled together different bits from GitHub and stuff, but that was kind of coded from scratch. And the contents were produced by the participants with the help of an artist who kind of curated them. But there are platforms you can use that kind of sort of off-the-shelf platforms where you can sort of make them with templates or with kind of softwares that are designed for iDoc making. So there's a couple, one called Korsakov and one called, I've forgotten now, but it'll come to me, but where they're kind of, but those are more based around how do you make kind of non-linear films. So they're kind of very film based, and they're about kind of how do you kind of create a film that has multiple options rather than one sequence. But what I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually doing training on how to make iDocs with kind of really user-friendly, low-cost platforms, which if you come to that webinar I mentioned, that's kind of what I'll talk about partly in that. So I'm aware that a lot of researchers want to make iDocs and iDoc-like things, but there's quite a high barrier to entry because of the cost of getting a coder or someone to help you, and because the kind of even the sort of non-linear filmmaking softwares are a little bit complicated and quite limited in terms of kind of what you can do with multiple different kinds of media. So what I've done recently in my own work is experiment with kind of simple tools like Canva or something called Gene.ly, which is meant to be for teachers to make interactive lessons, where you can make things that are very iDoc-like, even if they're not quite as sophisticated as some of the examples that I put in the slides, using tools that are really easy to use and very low cost. So that's something I'm working on at the moment to kind of try and democratize iDoc making. So if you want to know more about that, come to the webinar or get in touch and I'll chat about that. But yeah, I hope that helps answer the question.
Lovely, thanks, Ella. So next I've got one for Sue and then one for Heidi. Sue, your question is, with populism and authoritarianism on the rise, which innovative research methods can best be harnessed to meet the challenge to truth and reality?
Oh, not difficult at all question.
Not at all difficult. No, really easy one for you then.
It's not really about research methods. It's about research ethics. And it's about thinking about what are the consequences. Well, first of all, where is power in you know the different versions of the reality? This is the problem of post-normal science, that there are different versions of reality, different accounts. And when we're talking about epistemic injustice and hermeneutical injustice, there isn't really, you know, a ready-made program or tool that's going to be able to tell you immediately whether this is true or not, especially because media is so monopolistic and has been more and more intrusively colonized by commercial and extremely cynical commercial players who will upvote and amplify bad information and harmful information. And it's also part of the algorithm, so that bad and harmful information spreads much more easily, and negative emotions spread much more easily than positive emotions, than reasoned debate, than cool-headed thinking. So I don't think there's an easy method to that. But I think what is really important is to understand that education and learning is itself something creative. And it's the humanly creative part of our activity in history and our being in time, is our existence in time, and trying to understand things in time is part of our human creativity. And this is what we really need to foster in both our research and our education. Giving time and attention to people's processes of understanding what is going on, and taking them onto an ethical journey of asking who benefits by asking this question, who will be harmed by seeing things in this way, what kinds of things will be the consequences of this way of thinking, and thinking more slowly. So indeed, it's not really a technology or a tool, but it's really learning and placing an emphasis on the human being, education, and their ability to think for themselves. Because creativity is not just what we do outside of us. Creativity is also about this process of reflection that happens inside our own mind, that brings new moments of understanding and makes us creative actors in the drama of history, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you for that thorough and eloquent response. It wasn't an easy question. Heidi, I think yours is a little bit more straightforward. And then I have one for everyone. So Heidi, we have a question. Could you recommend some literature and authors on poetic inquiry as a method? Is it a method developed by you? I'm sorry I lost this part, says the questioner. Thank you so much. Very interesting for me. And that's been thoroughly upvoted. So away you go.
Yeah, thanks very much. I want to quickly just add to what, if I may, what Su-ming said so wonderfully. I think creative methodologies, arts-based methodologies also allow us to kind of document other realities and other truths. So in the space that we're in, where there's this real danger that truth is under question, that particular kinds of truth are pushed and promoted, it's our job as arts-based researchers and to kind of document other realities, to kind of give them voice, to make them visible, to provide an alternate to right? The dominant kind of views that are being expressed. So, ta-da, I'm going to follow you, Helen. Where would you learn about poetic inquiry as methodology? There's a wonderful website, and it's been a growing field for the last couple of decades now. And you can go to the International Symposium of Poetic Inquiry, ISPI, International Symposium of Poetic Inquiry, and they've got a range of conferences and retreats that have been conducted over the decades that kind of document and talk about the method. There's some really well-known names in that. Sandra Faulkner, for example, has written a lot about poetic inquiry and from a methodological perspective. Our book, which is upcoming, which Helen's put in the chat a couple of times now, is what we think is the first time an attempt to kind of write a guide on how to do poetic inquiry. Many of the other wonderful books all talk about it, how to do poetic inquiry in a much more how-to manual kind of way, and with a particular focus on how we see it as a real tool and method for decolonization. So it's upcoming. Please order it. We would love more and more people to be engaging with the methodology. Yeah, and the links are in the chat. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Heidi. And now we have a question which I think is going to be of potential interest to each of you. Oh, Sue, did you want to say something? Sorry, got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I just had a thought. Sorry, can I just interrupt everybody for just 1 second?
If you're really quick, yeah.
Yeah, actually about like effective methods. We are amongst the tide of populism and authoritarianism and extremely frightening messages that are getting across to people, and a frightening affect and emotion. I think we're finding that, doom mongering is not working. So laughter, play, and the creative methods are part of that. Humor is a really powerful tool, and play.
Yeah.
Absolutely lovely. Thank you. Right. I think this is probably going to be the last question. This is from Anya, who says, I can see how creative methods can enable a more decolonial and just form of inquiry. I'm interested in how the outcomes of this research are then disseminated in a way that also challenges established systems of distribution, e.g. academic publishers, monographs, scholarly articles, as those deprioritized in knowledge systems presumably won't have much access to these. So I'll throw this to all of you, each of you, well, one at a time maybe, but I'm sure you all have things to say about this. How can we disseminate in a more just way as well?
I'll go quickly. Absolutely. And I think one of the wonderful things about outputs from poetic inquiry, particularly in the form of poems, is that they do allow a wider dissemination away from these more traditional academic spaces, that the spaces we speak into. But if we're wanting to transform lives and shift lives, we have to get to the lives that we are talking about. I think poetry and inquiry are ways to do that. And so you could use it. So, for example, in this work with trans women in South Africa and Namibia, we developed the poems together, and they had all kinds of ideas on how they could use the poems to put them up in clinic facilities that are for young trans kids who are considering what it might mean and what that transition might mean for them. So there are many very ways that you can use it in community spaces, in all kinds of spaces. You could put up these poems as a way of disseminating and reaching wider audiences outside of the academy.
I could jump in next if you like. Fantastic. Okay, so I think it's an interesting question, and for me, I think it's about who are you kind of partnering with and who are you working with. So, from within my kind of freelance research work, I work with my partner who's an engagement specialist, so we work together under this kind of Progress Today banner. So he works routinely in spaces like colleges, in kind of community organizations, in housing associations and stuff. And we've kind of developed a partnership where I bring concepts from my research to these settings. So, for example, we did an event last week for the Family Arts Campaign, which was an event for people working in arts organizations doing community work across the country. And I spoke about this research around epistemic justice, about kind of the importance of equity knowledge production at that event. So I think that's kind of given me a bit of an insight into the importance of sort of partnering with people outside of academia. So I work mostly outside of academia now, but I think even if you're in academia full time, it's sort of thinking about who can you kind of work with who is in settings where people who aren't academics or who aren't reading academic books might kind of be, who could access this information. Because I think it's all very well producing nice creative things, but if they don't actually reach the people, then so it's the same kind of like 20 people still looking at them, which I think could be demoralizing for creative researchers. So yes, I think that partnership model for me is a solution to that question.
Yeah, well, just to very quickly cap that off then and round it off, definitely is to begin to think of dissemination as something that begins at the beginning. And it's not dissemination, and it's not just about products. It's about co-production. It's about collaboration. It's about nothing about people without the people that it's supposed to be about. And that is basically an ethical way of doing research, really, is thinking, what is it that the people that the research is about want from the process, and how are they going to meaningfully participate in the process, and not only participate, but benefit from that process. So yeah, I think it's just all, participation, engagement are all the way down, and dissemination is not at the end.
Lovely, thank you. And we just only have 1 minute left, and I know that the Zoom just closes at the end of the hour, so I'm not going to put another question because we'll only be halfway through. Abby, I'm hoping we can save the chat, please, and the Q&A, so that we've got records, because there's been so much and I haven't been able to keep up with it at all. But I really want to thank our wonderful panelists. I mean, I've just, sat here and in awe, but wonderful panelists, Ella Harris, Heidi van Rooyen, Su-ming Khoo, thank you so much for being part of this. And thanks everyone for attending, because you too have helped to contribute. There is going to be a recording, don't worry. Everyone has helped to contribute to making this a really excellent event. So thank you everyone for your time and your input. Best of luck. Hope to see you all in other creative methods sessions in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Thanks,
Thanks,
BUP.
everybody.
Thanks, Ella, and thanks, Heidi. Wonderful work.
Thanks, so
Yes,
lovely.
thanks, guys.
All of you, thank you so much. It was wonderful, delightful. Thank you. It made my morning. Thank you.
Good start to your week, Heidi. Take care,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.